ivory soap. Tastes absolutely terrible. And I know this because one day, when I was very young, I called my brother Glenn a bad name, not knowing that my mother was just out of vision, out of shot, right around the corner. 10 seconds later, I was being led by this earlobe down to our hall bathroom where the inside of my mouth and a bar of ivory soap became intimately familiar. My mother was a woman of her word, and what we might call as old school. Washing your mouth out with soap was not an idle threat, honestly. Between the time that my oldest sister Holly was born and I was born, well, actually, let me rephrase. Shortly after the two oldest were born, my father was hired by the government, and they started traveling. I figure about 7 moves in about 17 or 18 years span. Now, 3 or 4 of those were overseas, and she did it with this flair for logistics that General Patton himself would end, honestly. As Glenn mentioned, we traveled to Athens, Greece, and lived over there in the early 60s. Moved back to Maryland in the late 60s, and we always had music in our house. When we got back to Maryland, my father bought us a piano. Now, my oldest brother, Mark, picked up the trumpet. Holly was playing flute. Mark and Holly, if I'm not mistaken, and Glenn played the piano. I picked up violin, and Glenn, being the mellow member of the family, picked up the string bass, if you're familiar, that big, giant violin-looking thing. My mother loved that probably because he couldn't bring that home from school. But if you have any idea at all what a 9-year-old playing the violin sounds like, or a 14-year-old playing the trumpet sounds like, it's not a pleasant thing. But she tolerated it and took us to lessons and went to concerts and recitals with the patience of a saint. And I'll always thank her for that. When we got back from Athens shortly after, my father bought us a camper trailer. And we traveled a whole lot. And went all over the East Coast and traveled down into the Carolinas. And one trip we went to Winston-Salem. Now, I had always been bugging my father about taking us horseback riding, because I loved horses from a very young age. One day he finally acquiesced, and we went to a place where we could rent horses for a trail ride. Now, I've got this vision in my head. I'm going to be Io Silver, turning and reining the horse and riding down the dusty trail in a full gallop. That's not how it happens. You know, these are trail horses. If you've ever been on a trail ride, they're not picked because they're like this. They're picked because they're, they're mellow animals that are picked for their temperament. So we get there, and there's a trail boss, and there's 6 horses waiting for us, and Mark and Holly and Glenn and myself and my father get horses named Ranger and Smokey and Jack, horse names. My mother gets Poke. Poke the horse. So we get on these horses and we start on this trail ride, and my mother's at the end, my father's up front with the trail boss in front of him, and I'm ready to gallop. I want to be Io Silver, as I say, and start hearing my mother going, "Come on, horse, come on." I said, "What's the matter?" "He's stopping to eat all the time," she says. Well, Poke, being out of the barn, was grabbing grass, and he was going to grab grass while the grass grabbing was good, So she's complaining constantly. Now, these horses know where the barn is. They also know that at the barn is hay and food and water, and they can get this dopey tourist off their back, right? So we make a loop through the woods, and as we return, we come into this meadow. I remember it, hopefully clearly. We come down this little hill, and the trail boss turns around and shouts out, "Are you guys ready to run?" And I've been waiting for this for days. I'm ready, absolutely. But my mother, I could hear her very faintly in the back go, "Oh, God," like this. So, again, these horses do this all the time. They follow nose to tail. They know what's going on. The lead guy gives his horse a kick. It starts into a gentle canter. Everybody else follows. And then I start hearing this screaming like Armageddon is beginning. Oh! My mother's, here comes Poke, who is now morphed into a cross between Secretariat and Seabiscuit, running like a bat out of hell, if you'll excuse the expression in this house, with my mother, who was not known for her horsewoman skills, okay? I mean, Horsewoman of the Year was not on her CV. Her one hand way up in the air holding the reins, the other one gripping the pommel like it's the kingdom of God itself. Screaming at the top of her lungs, slow down, slow down. The trail boss gave his horse a kick and grabbed poked by the reins, and all was good, and we get back and she climbs off it. If I remember correctly, the stable hand asked, well, how was it? She goes, I think this horse is misnamed. Broke my foot. She was an adventurous person. We traveled so many times and did so many things, and my father was so good about getting us out and about, and she was always up for it. You know, you couldn't get her to go skydiving, but she was up for just about anything else. And this is one of my most cherished memories of my mother, is that it didn't matter, as Roshana said. She was ready to go. If you wanted to go for a ride to Arcadia and look at junk, she was fine with that. If you wanted to take a 350-mile trip to Ayers Rock from the house in Australia, she was up for it. And I always remember her for that, and I'm so grateful that she gave us all the opportunity to see as much of the world as we did. On behalf of myself and my family members, I want to thank you very, very much for coming. Your presence here honors her more than you know. Thank you very much.